Welcome to the Golden Mike Podcast, where personal growth simply isn't enough. I'm your host, Mark Cordone, a positive psychology coach, a do-gooder from the island of misfit toys who founded the Joy Revolution. Each week I'll wrap with an extraordinary guest doing extraordinary things through their own revolutionary work to talk about the ups, downs, and all-arounds of life. It's my mission to provoke and empower you through increased joy and inspire you to spark your own revolution to change history for the better. Welcome to the most serious happiness podcast in this multiverse. Welcome to the Golden Mike Podcast. All right, what is shaking? It is the Golden Mike Podcast with Dr. Andy Kazama, Dr. Andy Kazama, who works in both Yerkes Primate Lab and is a psychologist, psychology professor at Emory University here in Atlanta, Georgia. Even before we start, his stuff is in the show notes. But even before we start, before I was pushed out of the nest here at, if you want to call it that.
Spread your wings.
Before I spread my wings and flew, there's two things. There was a quote that Andy once showed me about work and play, and you can talk about it if you want a little bit. But this quote changed the way I thought about the work that I was doing, even though I was doing happiness work. It changed the way that I was thinking about what felt like work and what felt like play, and then it moved me towards, well, what am I doing right now that, if my life were to end, would be regrets, like I would regret not doing. The second thing was, and I never got to tell you this, man, when I did get pushed from the nest, you were one of the few people who called me up and said you will be missed. And I will never forget that, Andy. I appreciate it.
Well, I miss you to this day. And yeah.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about the Lawrence Pearsall Jack's quote? I mean, do you still use it?
I use it all the time. It's something that I incorporated into my class. It's something that when I came across that quote, I was panicked that I had to give this good life lecture, knowing nothing about the concept of eudaimonia, even like starting with the pronunciation of it. I was like, okay, here we go. And then
and eudaimonia being the idea that Aristotle threw out of living a good life, a life of excellence and virtue.
Yeah, I guess we should. A good podcast would define something like that, right? It's an amateur hour here, but yeah. So the general idea. I don't have the quote in front of me, so I'm kind of doing it off the top of my head here. But
it's like 4 lines. So it's
basically that the master of living isn't distinguishing between their work and their play, their love and their leisure, their recreation and their education. They're just pursuing their vision of excellence and leaving other people to decide whether they're working or playing, because they're always doing both. Mm-hmm. So
still hits me every time I hear it.
Me too, honestly. And I got that quote from people like students on campus that I ran into, and I was just like, how the heck are you putting out like this productive, like how are you sleeping, when do you have time to relax, like all that kind of stuff. And what my students are telling me is, well, yeah, this is my play, and it's something that I look at and I was like, this seems like work, this has got to be just killing you. And I'm like, absolutely not. There's nothing else I'd rather be doing when I'm doing this. So
and it's probably the same thing. It's probably the same thing for you. This sort of dual appointment. You're teaching 2 classes.
Absolutely. Intro
to neuroscience. I think you're doing a PTSD class.
That's right.
And then working at Yerkes, in addition to other roles that you're playing, father, husband, a podcast veteran, if you will, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And I'm sure people could look at what you're doing and be like, Andy, take your foot off the accelerator.
Yeah, for sure that quote has influenced me a ton, and when I looked back at what activities am I doing that are both work and play, it all started to come back to teaching. And I found myself coaching like my son's soccer team and teaching martial arts. And like when I looked back, I was like, man, I am teaching upwards of 7 days a week, like 7 times a week. Like I must really love this. And it doesn't feel like work. And I do have a very frenetic
Lawrence is
pace.
laughing in his grave right now.
Yeah. And so it, but that inspiration came originally from the Emory students I came into contact with, like our friend Melissa. That's
my gosh. Absolutely.
Who's here right now finishing up grad school. I don't know if you knew that, but
amazing.
She's doing amazing work, and she still has this super frenetic pace to her life. And she's someone who I look up to as like the ideal of this, Lawrence Pearsall Jack's master of living. Like she is a master of living.
Yeah. Well, I want to go into your story, but before we go into that story, just because you're a psychologist doesn't mean you know everything about psychology, right?
Let's make that very clear up front.
But doesn't that also have to do with sort of the idea of self-concordance? The idea of like really living from the inside out, like doing what's heartfelt versus what society expects out of you is or maybe I'm getting the whole self-concordance wrong.
Well, so my expertise isn't in positive psychology. So
I just wanted to get the psychologist to say that.
The academic side of it, I can't speak to that. But for sure, like when we talk about drives and motivations in psychology, and having these really unique drives that are specific to you based off of your genetics, off of your family, the environment that you grew up in, like all of these factors come in to create these very unique motivational drives. And if you can figure out, and I'm just saying this anecdotally, and I have taught, over 2,000 students at this point and advised a lot of them. So, but if you can figure out what those individual drives are, what are the activities that really create joy in you, to use, your joy revolution, creating that joy revolution in you, maybe.
I told you he's a master at podcasting, putting a plug in there.
That's going to, that's what's going to create that overall happiness. And it becomes this, like I always tell students, like find things that you can just get obsessed about. And that's your road to success right there.
Amazing. Well, let's talk about the beginning.
And for me, it's teaching.
That's awesome. And let's talk about the beginning of the road for you. The road that started in Juneau, Alaska.
That's it, yeah.
I know you were born. You're born there in Juneau. I remember you once did a lecture, and you're showing like these amazing glaciers, these skylines that were unbelievable. You're half Asian, half amazing, So talk a little bit about growing up in Juneau and what was that like?
Yeah, so my dad, he had a degree in secondary education, and when my mother was pregnant with me, he went to Juneau with her for a job interview, and it was during the salmon run, and he literally jumped in a river and grabbed a salmon with his bare hands and held it up to my mom and said, "I think I can live here."
I call bullcrap on that.
And so he got a job working for the school board. They had me. And then shortly thereafter, he just my dad is such a entrepreneurial kind of like brave person who's willing to just follow it all in, So he went all in on this fishing lodge business. And he built it.
Where were they coming?
Oh, so my dad's originally from Hawaii.
Okay.
And my mom's originally from Oregon. They met in Des Moines, Iowa, Drake University.
Oh, wow.
Got married, moved to Oregon, and then up to Juneau.
Okay.
But he's Japanese. My mom's Caucasian, so there was a lot of tension on both sides.
Interesting.
With that kind of biracial relationship. So that was very interesting to see.
Now, for little Andy, what were some of your earliest memories? I mean, I cannot imagine you, though I can, reaching into a river and pulling out a salmon with your bare hands, or being a curious kid that would just go and explore the glacier. Like, what was that like?
So one thing is, so my wife is always surprised at how many near-death experiences I had. So we literally lived on a bear stream, and in Alaska, it's just a very harsh place. And like I wouldn't trade my childhood for anything. I mean, it was amazing. I was constantly outside, playing in the woods, building forts, finding rickety boats and taking them out on the water, and almost drowning, watching bears catch salmon. My dog, I had this amazing golden retriever who was literally my best friend.
Wait, was it literally you and your dog?
Yeah, my sister too. I have a younger sister. Okay. But it was a family operation. My grandparents from my dad's side would come from Hawaii every summer and help run the lodge with. It was like growing up in a little version of Hawaii, actually, in this very isolated area of Juneau.
Okay.
So this is where we get into kind of the Asian aspect, where I always felt like I was fully Asian and fully Caucasian. The summers I was just surrounded by Hawaiians, eating Hawaiian style Alaskan food.
Hawaiian style Alaskan food. What is that? Like salmon musubi?
Yeah, exactly. Like
bear musubi.
Yeah, you have. But going to school also, and having friends not be used to like the weird foods I was bringing in, like seaweed wasn't a thing at the time,
Oh, yeah.
But for me, like spam musubi was like a very normal lunch to have.
Absolutely. Did you feel like you stuck out based on sort of that? Like, did you ever feel like one of these things is not like the other when you'd bring your some of your Asian roots things to school?
For sure. And that's one thing I try and help students with here, and you've been a part of that too, with the Real Talk, the Asian mental health things, confronting those feelings of like, am I Asian enough? Those kinds of things. So I for sure felt that growing up. But again, getting back to like what it was like to grow up on a fishing lodge, it was just an incredible experience where I'm just surrounded by nature all the time, and not just normal nature that we see in Atlanta. Like we're talking about like humpback whales bubble feeding. That's one of my earliest memories, and I think really what got me on this track of biology and exploring the natural world as a scientist was I remember sitting on this rock looking out over the ocean, and I start to see these huge bubbles popping up one by one in a circle, just bloop, bloop, bloop. And all of a sudden, this humpback whale just bursts out of the middle of it, jaws open, just rah, and then sinks back down. And it was the first time I'd ever seen anything like that. And I just remember thinking, like, how does that work? That's amazing. And so I was constantly surrounded by those kinds of things. We have very high bald eagle population density in Juneau. So I remember sitting as a really young child with an immature bald eagle just sitting right next to me. We were just like hanging out, looking out over the water. And it's just like really peaceful moments of my childhood where, so that really shaped like my drive to explore natural world. And I never thought I'd be a neuroscientist. I thought I was going to go into field biology. I thought I'd be,
well, you'd think that
bears.
You would go into field biology, like with that, the humpback whales and the bears and all that kind of stuff. I am curious about what brought you to both biology and psychology, but also at the same time, you're talking about this sort of a peak moment, right? That you were having as a kid, where you're standing out, kind of just watching like the magnificence, the harmony of life, right? Yeah. As an adult, when was the last time you felt something like that?
Oh, good question. The last spring break, it was the first spring break I've taken in probably 20 years. I went fly fishing with my dad to Ascension Bay, Mexico, which is this amazing nature preserve. And so going around and seeing that kind of natural beauty, that really, I just realized how much I miss that kind of thing. And I definitely want to do much more of that. I've been lucky enough as a professor, which is another like perk that I never thought I would have, which was this ability to travel abroad, which I didn't have a lot as a kid. But now as a professor, I've been able to travel to the UK, to Scotland, and England, and India, and that's amazing to see these natural formations too. And it's way different than Alaska, but it keeps you very curious. You know?
Okay, so let's talk about this now. You're in Juneau, Alaska still, and at some point you made the call, or someone made the call to come back to the States. I know you went to, I believe, Davidson.
Yeah, that's right.
You went to Davidson, and you were a psychology major there.
I was a biology major.
Oh, you were a biology major.
So I didn't find neuroscience until my junior year.
Or did it find you?
Yeah, it really did. I mean, so we talk about kind of like adversity.
Now, did you move from Juneau to Davidson?
So
wow.
So my senior year, my dad had gotten very sick and had to quit his job. So our income that year was almost nothing. And it came down, I wasn't even certain that, how we were even going to pay for college. And I had applied to University of Hawaii. That was kind of like a safety squad family there. I applied to Wake Forest. I was really interested in medicine at the time. And then I applied very last minute. I had played tennis with this guy who had gone to Davidson. And he was like, if you're applying to Wake Forest, you should really check out Davidson. I didn't know Davidson from a hole in the wall.
Oh, the synchrony of it.
And so he called Davidson. And he was like, hey, this kid's never heard of you. Can he fax his application in? And I said, yeah, I guess maybe they just need another Alaskan to check the quota or whatever. But they had this amazing policy, which was that it's the applications are blind in terms of like income, things like that. And their deal is if you get in, they find you money. So it ended up being cheaper for me to go to Davidson than anywhere else. And in fact, I went there sight unseen. We didn't have money to fly me down to visit schools or anything like that. It was like, hey, this is a cheap place that you can go.
Wow.
The admissions officer literally picked me up from the airport. Her name's Debbie Hogue.
Oh my God.
I'll never forget that kindness. She picked me up. She took me to her house. She took me to, Walmart, I think, or something to get some supplies and help me set up in the first dorm. So it was like such a fish out of water when I went from Alaska to the South.
Yeah.
Which was crazy.
Were you like, Debbie, where's the Spam Musubi around here?
No Asians. There was a Chinese buffet that I used to. I had no money, and I used to eat there once a day, and I would just pack as much, like 3-4 plates of food.
Kazama, get it.
That was my one meal that I would eat for the day.
Get it, Kazama.
They lost so much money on me. It's not funny, but super nice. But yeah, so I appreciated that so much about Davidson, as brutal a place as it was for 4 years.
Right. Why brutal?
The at the time we had the highest workload in the country, and being low income and coming from kind of Juneau school district, it wasn't. I didn't have a great education. I had some great teachers, but overall, I was one of those kids that was definitely bright enough to just kind of skate by with mostly A's. Without really learning how to study or learn information. So when I got into Davidson my freshman year, I was completely unprepared for it in many, many ways. And being low income, you look around and you just feel like, man, everybody else knows what to do. like, how do they know all of this?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how to study the things they've been exposed to. I remember reading the Iliad, and I was like, man, and I was talking to my roommate, it's a pretty tough reading, huh? And he's like, oh, I already read it 4 times, twice in Latin. I was like, okay then.
Wow.
So I just had that feeling of being like completely unprepared. So it really crushed me for 4 years.
Was the press like something in which you ever sought out like therapy or the counselor, school counselor?
It was, I didn't even know to do that.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird? And
I don't think so.
Now I'm a teacher and I encourage my students to do that all the time. I'm all about mental health.
Yeah.
But at the time, I was just like, no, you just got to suffer.
Yeah, it's part of the it's part of the
you just don't even
process.
know that you don't know. And and
in retrospect, would you have maybe thought about using those resources?
Oh, I would have benefited hugely by that.
Okay.
But what I would have benefited even more by was if I had amazing professors, but nobody reached out early on and said, hey, let me sit you down and show you how to learn information. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I've been able to pass forward. Now, I designed my whole course around, in fact, I just taught a freshman seminar, which we haven't talked about this, but I just finished up a semester of a freshman seminar on the science of study. The whole thing was designed around freshman me. The whole thing is, what does psychology say are the best ways to learn information, the best ways to take notes, the sleep hygiene, stress and anxiety management for test taking, things like that. We cover all of that. It was basically like, these are the things I wish freshman me had known.
Sure.
Sure. But I have incorporated that into my intro neuroscience course too.
Well, let's go there. Let's go there for a second before we talk about.
Yeah, we're getting way off track.
No, we're not. No, we're not. This is we're letting the themes bubble up.
Yeah.
But what are some of the things that not only a person who is maybe a freshman in high school or college, but I know that multiple people can skate by college and even grad school without learning some of these tools. What would be like some of your top tools that we can consider?
Yeah, and I think this is so now that I have an expertise in learning and memory, I think the tips that I give my students are all based on the neuroscience of how these neural networks get set up. I don't know if this is going to get way too in the weeds with it, but these neural networks, there's basically, we want to activate as much of the network as possible. So the way you study is by basing the information, the new information that you want to learn, and you embed that in things you already know about. So I always tell my students, only half jokingly, that I want to take over their life for the semester. And what I mean by that is I want them to look at the things in their world, the memories that they have, and they're going to reinterpret it through the lens of all this kind of jargony neuroscience. So you're taking, so that would be one tip is like, you got to make it about you. Like whatever information you're learning, make it be about you, because your brain cares more about that than other things that are just dry pieces of unrelated pieces of information. So the more you can relate the information back to your life. So job one is like convince yourself that you love it. Even if you're taking like organic chemistry or whatever, you got to figure out like, why does that matter?
And gotcha. Yep.
So you buy into, okay.
Gotcha.
Now, otherwise you're working against your biology, right?
Yep.
Your brain doesn't want to learn things that it doesn't care about. So that's kind of job one. And then job two is like, spend just as much time organizing the information as on the information itself. So you think like, how many times in your life have you said, oh man, I know that, I just can't get to it. Like, it's just not coming.
It's like tip of the tongue.
Right. Yeah. That tip of the tongue phenomena is it's a lack of organization. So the things that I do with my students, we do a lot of memory palace work, which are really interesting ways to, it's just a natural way to organize information based on spatial locations.
And now, is this like where you go around, like you think about your house?
Yeah,
and then
do it. houses are great places for memory palace work.
Okay.
Any place that's really familiar to you, and you just start setting up interesting scenes that have all the information embedded into it as you go through.
Hey, it's Mark. I hope you're digging the Golden Mike podcast. If you have or are just starting your own revolution fueled by joy, there's a site I created for you. If you, like me, believe that personal growth is simply not enough, if you, like me, are committed to changing history for the better in both micro and macro ways, check out joyrevolution.com. In there, you'll find an archive of our over 200 Golden Mike Live Facebook shows, and of course, our podcast that you're currently listening to. Check out the blogs highlighting how positive psychology and joy theory apply to your everyday life. There's even some cool clips from our Joy Revolution course geared towards influencers, speakers, writers, and change agents. It's all there. Go to joyrevolution.com. That's joyrevolution.com. Let's get back to the episode.
Well, I was gonna ask you, and you know, just for the standpoint of application and my own benefit, I'm giving a TED-like talk at Speakers Who an event called Speakers Who Dare in New York City in March, and see, this is a rigid mindset thing, but in the past, I have had difficulty memorizing things. And so I've used some memory palace work to help me out with that.
Okay.
What else?
How did
what
it
else?
Work?
I blanked out
because that's the stress response.
So well, in the TEDx, I blanked out, and because one of the things was when I practiced, I didn't practice with the stress that would, I didn't practice in front of lights, or I didn't rehearse it as if I was actually rehearsing in front of an audience. It was just like, see if I can remember it. Now I have another one coming up, and I've got 4 full weeks and a couple lines, a couple pages worth of stuff, about 12 minutes. A couple cues, a couple pauses, and some delivery pieces. What would you say to the adult who is that would, like me, say, I just have a bad memory?
Oh man, I hear this from students all the time. Like, I'm just not good at memorizing stuff, or I'm just not smart. They tie memory to intelligence.
It's a fixed mindset.
And for sure, if you look at the memory championships, they did. If you read Josh Foer's book, what is it called? Moonwalking with Einstein, I think is the book. And he had a great TED talk on it too, by the way, if you want the Cliff Notes. But,
right on.
But it was they looked at these memory champions, and they did IQ testing on them, and they found they're not geniuses, and these are people who are memorizing like an entire deck of freshly shuffled cards in like less than 15 seconds in order.
Holy cow.
So you kind of think like, well, that's got to be
holy cow.
That they must be geniuses, right? No, they're good at organizing information, and they've practiced how to organize the information. So what I would tell you for your prep is like, think about organizing the talk in a way that's going to be, a natural delivery, and then make it as visual as you can. Now, I will say that I've met a few students. I just became aware of this last semester, but there's a condition called aphantasia. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right.
I have that.
But you have no mind's eye. So you can picture like an apple sitting on my hand, right? Like you can imagine what it would look like. Well, these are people who do not have that ability. They have no ability to visualize. And I believe that's about 4% of the population. So for those individuals, memory palace work has to be like an audio tape that you're playing for yourself. But I do want to throw that out. If you're frustrated with your learning and saying, man, why I can't ever imagine this. That might be you.
It sounds like for the majority of people, it starts with the way that we talk to ourselves. Like, I just don't learn well, or I just can't memorize anything. You're already starting in the negative. And then when you go to memorize, you have a stress response. And I think I've heard this. It's very hard to learn when you're in a stress response.
Yeah. Because your body is thinking fight or flight. It's thinking about survival. These are really old evolutionary mechanisms.
It could give a crap about a deck of cards.
And it's so funny. Like, I mean, I talk about this with my students all the time, especially on test day. It's like you're going to come into the test day and your body's really getting ready to bang. Like it thinks you're going to be in a fight for your life. And I assure them, as far as I know, nobody's going to come in and attack you, right? But that's not your body's natural response to this situation. It has one stress response, and that's survival, which has served us well for, millions of years. But we also have this cognitive control over it, that if we can use these techniques to kind of tamp down that stress response. So that's where that extra frontal lobe that we have kicks into place and is uses that to kind of tamp down this amygdala response of threat. And so those are techniques that will help you at least reappraise the situation and say all of these people want me to do well. That's a classic one, right? Yeah. But anything you can do to take some deep breaths, warm up your brain beforehand, run through the memory palace really quickly.
Okay.
And you just run through it, and then that organizing principle, again, we're giving you things where you're working with your biology.
Yeah.
Right. And so these are all things that your brain wants to do to learn, organize, and then recall information.
Okay. And this is just one final thing, because you got me nerding out right now. And unfortunately, you told me you have an unlimited amount of time to talk, but you got me nerding out right now. How much is a good night's rest? When it comes to all this stuff?
Yeah, so sleep is such a critical component of learning and memory. Your brain organizes the information at night. So when we walk through the process of falling asleep, I want you to imagine that throughout the day, your neurons are firing kind of independently. They're just pop, 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 pop. And as we start to drift off to sleep, your brain actually starts to synchronize its popping. So it's pop, 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 and where all the neurons are firing together. And as we go into deeper and deeper layers of sleep, your brain starts to pulse 1 to 3 hertz, which means 1 to 3 times a second. So it's whoom, 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 whoom. And what that's doing is the neurons that are firing together are wiring together. So your brain is and then you bump it back up into REM sleep, the rapid eye movement phase. And that looks very much like wakefulness. And this is where a lot of our dreams are occurring, in this REM stage. But you're also replaying the memories that you had throughout the day. And now that your brain has been locked in and ready to go, now when it replays those memories, you've organized it. And now these neural networks will actually take shape. So that you're going to go through several cycles of these throughout the night, and and you're going to spend more and more time in REM sleep the more sleep you get. So depends on your age, different age people, and different people need different amounts of sleep. I always hated the people that I got 5 hours of sleep, I feel fantastic. I don't know.
I think it's a myth. I think it's a myth.
People are, but
I think it's a myth.
And some people do have a biphasic rhythm. This is where we get into that siesta culture, where people sleep. They take a power nap in the day or a longer nap in the day, and that's fine too. But as long as you're getting 7-8 hours, probably at your age.
I have a quad-phasic culture. I take 4 naps a day.
That would be amazing. Yeah.
I love these little deviations out.
Yeah.
And then I want to pop back in if that's cool with you.
Yeah.
And anytime, just give me that look. Give me the Kazama wink, and we'll go back into what you were talking about. I don't know if y'all can hear it, but I see you lighting up with joy as we talk about this stuff.
Oh, I love this stuff.
And so let's go back into your history again, and then we'll talk about, we'll bring it back into some of what you're doing right now again.
Sure.
So we started off in you and I. I dropped out the first week in Davidson, but you stayed. But you started at Davidson, biology major.
Yeah.
Talk about that. You kind of, with these sort of resilience and study skills and stuff like that, hadn't yet acquired.
I had
them,
none of those.
And so that seemed like a pretty pressing 4 years for you.
Yeah, they were really the hardest years of my entire life. It was just grind. Every day was just grinding, and being told constantly, like, every test score, like I would look at the test range, and I would know what I got because I knew I was going to be at the bottom.
Why didn't you give up? And it's not
it never crossed my mind to give up. I don't know. I'm just not wired that way. I think, it was, now for sure, it beat down my self-confidence. As you know, I can't stand, any kind of affirmations or, I almost refused to believe it. And I had this like heuristic drilled into me for 4 years that I believed the way the world worked was that smart people got good grades and dumb people got bad grades. Like, that was my heuristic. And I got bad grades for 4 years, like abysmal grades. Mm-hmm. So if having believed that heuristic, what was I forced to believe about myself?
Sure.
I must be a stupid person.
Sure.
And I still like struggle with that all the time. We've talked about this with the imposter syndrome. Like,
absolutely.
Am I qualified to do this?
Absolutely.
like even being on the podcast, as we talked about.
You drive me, and we're breaking the fourth wall here, but you drive me crazy, Kazama. Like, you're such a great person to have on this. But also at the same time, it's so overpowering sometimes, that feeling of, am I qualified to do this? And especially when you've had, like, when you went through 4 years of that, that's a lot of unlearning to do for the subconscious, because you have an immediate response to go back to the imposter syndrome.
Yeah. And I started dating my wife freshman year, and for sure I couldn't have gotten through it without her. I mean, she was there all the time, and constantly trying to reverse it. She was really mitigating the impacts of it, saying that, and part of me was like, well, she's such an amazing person. Like, she must see something in me,
you just had nothing, Kazama.
Yeah, really, and I had good friends in college who, believed in me, so I think it would have been much worse if I had not had that support network, and maybe I would have like given up. What was one of the most memorable things you ever heard your wife say to you that helped push you through the 4 years that you were there? I can't think of any one. I mean, it was just constant love and support from her, and we used to take walks in the evenings in North Carolina. It's not like Alaska at night where you're like freezing cold.
Or there's bears in North Carolina, but not like.
Yeah, Davidson had this beautiful campus that they had these swings, like swinging porch swings all over campus. So we would just sit down and rock and talk about things and cry, and it was just. But having that support, knowing that she was always going to be there. It's just like, it meant everything.
So you had a valve. You had a valve. You could. You didn't have to suppress things.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm a very open person, as like what you see is what you get. With me pretty much all the time. I have a very little poker face.
No. You're not. You don't even have checkers face.
Exactly. So she was always there for me and she knew what was going on.
Okay.
But, and we were, I was there for her too. She went. It's not like her road was super easy either. But but she had at least was a great student.
Thank goodness we didn't get into comparison traps when you look at her grades and yours, right?
Yeah, there would be no point.
Yeah, there'd be no point to it. So when you went to neuroscience,
this is a great story.
What was the moment?
So I had applied to study abroad in Kenya for field biology.
Right on.
And this was when I was on my field biology track. I thought, I'm going to be researching brown bears in Alaska. Life is going to be great. I didn't get into that program. It was very competitive. I didn't have the grades, obviously, as we talked about. And so I was scrambling for courses, and there was only one course that was still left that nobody wanted to sign up for. It was this introductory neuroscience. You had to interview with this professor. His name's Julio Ramirez. He's one of the biggest influences in my life. And he would tell you about how difficult it was going to be, that it met twice as long as other courses. And at Davidson, you only got 1 credit. Didn't matter if it was a communication course or this course that met twice as long and had a lab 7 days a week. 7.
What do you mean in a lab 7 days a week?
The first exam that I took, it took me 9 hours to do it. And I wasn't even like the slowest. So Davidson has this great honor code where it's closed book, untimed. It was a take-home test. Sure. It took me 9 hours to do it.
That's like PhD comps right there.
So when I went to graduate school, I was at UT Houston at the medical school taking medical neuroscience, and it was 98% review because of this crazy, insane course. I mean, that's one of those moments where you're just like, it could have been a very crushing thing because that was such a difficult course. But like, I'll never forget that. I still say this on my very first day of class. I kind of pay respects to him because this is what got me hooked in it. What he told me was that everything you do, all your emotions, your memories, all of that comes because there are neurons in your head that either fired or didn't fire. And somehow all of these billions of yeses and nos turn into who you are. And from that moment on, it was like the sky opened. I was like, and I was like, all right, let's do this. And then I started to see the application of neuroscience and all of the positive things it could do to help me make an impact in the world. He took us, our first lab activity, he actually took us to an Alzheimer's clinic, and he just had us sit down. He left us alone. He said, I want you to interview this person. I'll be back in half an hour. And I talked to this woman who couldn't remember the names of her children, was suffering pretty severe dementia, but could tell me how to bake an apple pie. And I walked out of that clinic saying, we got to do something about this. And neuroscience was the path to which I could contribute.
Was that one of the first times you were like, this is the social impact I want to make? Or one of the bigger times you had said that?
Yeah, it's one thing to study bear populations in Alaska. That is super important work. But in terms of my own personal gratification, I wanted to be able to impact, many, many people through this research. So this is why I was willing to go into lab 7 days a week, was because he convinced me this is worth doing.
Sure. And it's absolutely wild as you talked about it and seeing dad in dementia, right?
Yeah,
and
I'm so sorry to hear about it.
It's all good. It's a celebration, baby, right?
Yeah.
And he'll be on the phone, and I'm like, who are you talking to? And he's like, oh, I'm on call right now. And he retired multiple years ago.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, oh, do you need help? Do you need a ride? And he's like, yeah, I'm gonna have to get dressed and blah blah blah. And then he'll forget, and I know that that's his reality.
Yeah.
And so why at this point burst his bubble, right?
Yeah.
But then I'll hear him go and then he'll go and sit by the piano and play Que Sera, Sera.
It just comes out.
It's perfect. It's perfect. You know, like I see like, you know, I'll call the piano tuner to come by, and then my dad will come out and perform, and the piano tuner's like, this dude's a virtuoso, you know? But then my pops will ask 20 times, like, oh, how much is this piano worth? How much is this piano worth? So it's really, you know, I think it's one thing to read about it in the books, but it's another thing when you actually see just how much, you know, Dr. Ramirez, when he's talking about everything you do is either about a neuron firing or a neuron not firing. Yeah. And so to this day, I'm guessing you still completely believe that we are our neurons.
Yeah. It's the neuroscientist in me hates that I'm a dualist, that I separate mind and body.
That's where I'm going with this, baby.
But in terms of the way I look at it and the way I was trained to think about it as a scientist, I grew up very conservative Christian. But the way I've been trained to think about this is now I'm comfortable with this differentiation between observable truths that we can measure, we can see, truths that are in the realm of scientific inquiry, and revealed truths revealed by the heavens, by philosophy, all of these things.
Talk about all those truths. I mean, that was a lot of truths to go through.
So, yeah. Again, this dichotomy between the observable truth. So in my life, when I need to make a decision off of how I think the world works, and there's something that I can literally observe, things that are part of the scientific record, then I'll lean on science to explain things. Things about psychology, things about certain aspects of emotion theory and motivation, reward, those kinds of things. We can actually measure that in the brain, and that's different than the observable truths about what does it mean to be kind and compassionate. Where do you get your strength from? What do you rely on when you're struggling emotionally? And that's when I lean on those revealed truths. And spending a lot of time with the Tibetan monastics, it's why I am such a big believer in this 100-year vision that His Holiness has about the way to increase kindness and compassion in the Western world is to show them empirically that it's a better way to live. And it's this bridging of these two truths.
So it's no longer in paradox with each other. It's almost like a complete synchrony of things in harmony.
Yeah. And in myself, and I'm big a fan of this yin yang balance, right? All the time. Yeah. And this idea of dynamic balance, which we've talked about a long time ago, and we could talk about more today. But that's where those two truths kind of come together in me, and they used to battle each other, and they don't anymore, because I've gotten to this level of maybe acceptance that these are just they're describing different phenomena, and that's fine.
Talk about some of your experience that's kind of led to sort of that dynamic balance, because I actually think that a lot of people feel that pull in different directions rather than necessarily feeling the coming together of things. And then you've got things like heart math that's talking about the vagus nerve and how that's what really will have you feel complete. Well, talk about these moments for you.
So this again comes back down to that initial quote from Julio Ramirez about when you understand the nature of the neuron, it works in a fractal-like way to describe much larger life principles. So the neuron, when we talk about its resting state, we think of it's not actually resting. So every neuron in your head is constantly being pulled like a rubber band, in tension, grinding. It has these pumps that are maintaining it at a certain electrical level. And then it's this all or nothing firing as it gets stimulated. And this firing, this action potential, it raises it into the state of balance, but only for a split second. I mean, this whole thing happens in 1 microsecond.
Yep.
And so you're just flying through this balance point, and then you're coming back down to grinding. And think about that as your life, you know? Mm-hmm. Like, this is what life is. Like, it's not this like static. We always want to be in balance, but we're never actually in balance. And we can find ourselves getting super frustrated by that, right?
Sure.
But I think, like, what I learned from Julio is that this is the way you're built. Every cell in your brain is built to do this. It's built to grind. And then you start reappraising your, situation and thinking, yeah, I'm actually built to grind. I can actually do this. I wish freshman me had gotten that message. I didn't find neuroscience until junior year. I would have, but that's his mantra that when you understand the nature of the neuron, you understand the nature of the self. That you're actually built to grind, and you have this incredible potential within you to handle these pressure situations, because it's the pressure situations that cause change and growth, right? So if you talk to retired people, you ask them like, oh, what's your day? What's going on these days? And they're like, everyone I've talked to always tells me how busy they are. Mm-hmm. So, I've got this and I've got that and I've got this and I've got that. It's like we set up these things like, well, when I retire, I'm just going to kick back and relax. But their brains are not built to do that. Their brains are built to grind. So retirement is not like, oh, now I'm going to sit back and relax. You just change like your daily activities, but you're still grinding and growing and changing. And the people who aren't doing that are most likely depressed. Right.
Absolutely. And, I think the other thing is, there's that notion out there called post-ecstatic growth, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think folks will think that, post-ecstatic growth means I'll be in joy and I don't have to do work, and it's, I'll change automatically. But actually, it's the grind of reflecting, the grind of introspection, that kind of grind versus, kind of a blunt force happening to you. Yeah. And so I love the fact that Dr. Ramirez and you talk about the idea that our neurons really are set up. They're more than just metaphors. They set up for how our bodies are built.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed the Golden Mike podcast. There's more good stuff coming your way. But until the next episode, let's stay in touch, yes? Find us on Instagram as TheJoyRev, or communicate with like-minded revolutionaries in our Facebook group. Search The Joy Revolution Underground. And of course, don't forget to check out the classes, articles, blogs, and some serious fun at joyrevolution.com. That's joyrevolution.com. Now, until then, what will you do to change history for the better? Let's go out and play, shall we? Press start to begin.